Susan Euler. How far are we removed from the people of the past? Let's find out. A human generation is 25 years. This is a biological definition, not a social definition. It's based on the average age at which a woman gives birth to her first child, between the ages of 20 and 30. Of course, many women give birth before age 20 and after age 30. 25 is just an average, and that average has remained fairly constant throughout human history. Here's how it works. You and the others in your age group are a generation. Your parents are one generation back, or one generation removed from your generation. Your grandparents are 2 generations removed. Your great-grandparents are 3 generations removed, and your great-great-grandparents are 4 generations removed. All 4 of these generations are typically born during the span of 100 years, 1 century. So, on average, 4 human generations are born each century. To explain this further, let's look at a classroom of students. Here's student 0. She was born in the year 2000, in the first year of the 21st century. Let's pretend that the students who sit directly behind her are her mother, who, using the 25-year average, would have been born in the 1970s, her grandmother, born sometime between 1945 and 1955, her great-grandmother, born in the 1920s, and her great-great-grandmother, who would have been born sometime in the first decades of the 20th century. I like to call this moving back in time through grandmother generations. Incidentally, the grandmother generation born during the 1920s is the generation of Queen Elizabeth II, who died while I was making this video. The British royal family provides a perfect illustration of how close we really are to past generations. Here's a photo taken of the present king, Charles III, in 1948 when he was a newborn. He is being held by his mother, the soon-to-be Queen Elizabeth II. Standing behind them is her father, King George VI. And seated beside them is King George's mother, Queen Mary. Queen Mary was born in 1867, and she is King Charles's great-grandmother. Even though student 0 was born 50 years later than King Charles, her great-great-grandmother could also have been born in the 19th century. Not as early as 1867, but maybe in the 1890s. But it's still only 4 generations. This is about human relationships as well as time spans. Remember, a century consisting of 100 years is a human invention, and 25 years between generations is only an average. Individual cases may vary, but not really by all that much, because that's biology. Now, let's look at this in terms of art. What does this have to do with art? Well, everything. Because art is always an excellent way to understand the past and visually illustrate the passage of time. My dad used to say that you are always the product of the year in which you were born. What this means is that the person we become is greatly influenced by what we saw, heard, and experienced during our first 20 or so years of life. We all know how older people tend to resist modern styles. The word resist is in quotes here because it's not necessarily resistance. It's just a kind of built-in preference for the way things used to be and look. It's always been this way. For example, in Hogarth's Marriage a la Mode, painted in 1743, we see the fathers wearing very out-of-date full-bottomed wigs, which were in vogue when they were young. The groom, however, is wearing a wig that's at the height of current fashion, complete with a large black bow at the nape of the neck. But this is not to say that although fashions and ways of doing things change, that we are unfamiliar with and reject all things from the past. Not at all. We are surrounded by them, and we still use them, and they are very much a part of our current lives. For example, the Chrysler Building in New York City was built during the 1920s. And there's no shortage of items available from the recent past if you wish to own some, not even any shortage of items available from the more distant past, or from the really distant past, although these are more difficult to buy on eBay. But let's return to the classroom. Most classes have way more than 5 students. Most have at least 30. So when was the student who sits in seat number 30 born? And how far is she removed in terms of grandmother generations from student 0? We have already seen that student 0's great-great-grandmother of 4 generations back was probably born in the first decades of the 20th century. Well, student in seat number 30 was born 30 grandmother generations back. She would have been born around 1250, during the High Middle Ages when the Gothic cathedrals were being built, and 100 years before the time of the Black Death. Now, how can that be? 31 students in a classroom is not a large number of people. They would all know each other. How can the student in seat number 30 have been born during the Middle Ages? Hold that thought a minute while we look at the students in a college lecture hall with 100 students. Here is student 100. When was he born? Counting back from the present day to our student 0, he would have been born 2,500 years ago, around the year 500 BC, during the Archaic Greek period. That's only 100 human generations, or grandmother generations back. This means, stay with me here, that people living today are only 100 generations removed from the people living in ancient Greece. 98 generations if you are a baby boomer. Do the math. 2,500 divided by 25 years equals 100. 100 human generations. Starting to get real now, isn't it? The classical civilizations of ancient Greece and Rome have had a lasting impact on Western civilization, on the art, the systems of government, and the law. In fact, even our coins are directly modeled after ancient Roman coins. Roman coins, like their modern counterparts, had a head of someone on one side, typically the ruler, and a scene, building, or cultural symbol on the reverse, the side commonly known as tails. This is a very tangible link to the past, and there is certainly no shortage of actual Roman coins around, as well as art, architecture, and miscellaneous artifacts, which is true of past civilizations worldwide. If you look around, you will see that the past is everywhere, even going back to the Upper Paleolithic period. Here are the earliest known cave paintings. They are located in Chauvet Cave in France and were painted between 30,000 and 32,000 years ago. So how many human generations is that? Cue drum roll. 1,280. No way. I know. I have trouble believing it myself. I mean, Yankee Stadium holds 54,282 people. Carnegie Hall has 3,671 seats. The average high school gym holds at least 1,500 people. So this means that if you and all 1,280 of your grandmothers on your mother's side, going back to the time of Chauvet, wanted to attend a high school basketball game together, you could easily find seats. That seems impossible. Too few people, right? But again, do the math. 32,000 years divided by 25 equals 1,280. That's only 1,280 human generations separating us from the men and women who painted Chauvet. Not really very many. It's only 1,280 grandmothers back in time. Very close to us, actually. Language also provides a strong link to the past, and we use old words and phrases all the time. For example, my grandfather was a rancher in California's San Joaquin Valley. He used to show us how to call pigs using the method his father taught him. Suey, pig, pig, pig. Where did that word suey come from? Well, suidae, a Latin word, is the genus for swine. Now, my grandfather didn't speak Latin, nor did his father, but I suspect that this pig call was passed down through the generations from some ancestor living during Roman times who would have spoken Latin. In fact, I would not be surprised if Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus himself, a hero of the Roman Republic and a farmer, would have called his pigs the very same way. Only he wouldn't have used the word pig. That's Anglo-Saxon. Porcus is the Latin word. Suey, pork, pork, pork. Sabotage is a French word. It means a deliberate action aimed at weakening an entity through subversion, disruption, work slowdown, and destruction of property. In other words, through sabotage. It was first used during the 19th century worker strikes, when working class people wore wooden shoes known as sabots, clogs in English. The story goes that workers would sometimes accidentally drop one of their sabots into a factory's machinery, bringing about an immediate work stoppage. That would certainly be effective, but unfortunately it might only be an urban myth. Nonetheless, the workers did use their wooden shoes as projectiles and to bang on pots to create a lot of noise and confusion. In fact, the word sabotage might even be a reference to the workers themselves. as in subversive acts done by those sabot-wearing ruffians, the saboteurs. But here's my favorite, drop a dime. It means to anonymously tip off the police by using a payphone. For most of payphone history, a local call cost a dime. This is something you see in film noir. Those classic black and white movies from the 1930s through the 1950s in which people are always involved in criminal activity of some kind or other. To stop getting themselves killed, in the days before police tip lines, dropping a dime was usually the best course of action. For the 10-Minute Professor, this is Dr. Susan Rae Euler. Thanks for tuning in.